some people it's actually quite disturbing. I mean, her voice is strangely different from other women's voices.
There is a way that it climbs some kind of celestial staircase and makes you aware of doors high up in the silence where the tenderness of the divine awaits us.
It has got a brittle quality, almost like blue eggshells. It's got that kind of fragility about it. What it does is it comes directly from the spirit. It's elemental.
We present a portrait of the Irish singer Riain, her enduring partnership with the monastic community of Glenstill Abbey in County Limerick, and her exploration into the experience for which she has coined a new word, theophany, the sound of God.
I was born in 1951, the youngest of three, an older brother, an older sister, in southwest Ireland, a troubled child from what my parents would tell me. But I know that I was always sounding, making sounds a long time before I spoke. One of the wonderful memories I have of childhood was that every Sunday evening our extended family would gather together. There'd be a big table spread of sandwiches and so on, and then the songs would start. It was extraordinary. My father would always sing, "I'll take you home again, Kathleen." You see, and he had to sing this. My Uncle Mick always had to sing, "When they carried out her coffin down the old bog road." That was his song, Uncle Mick. And then my mother would always sing, "I peeped in to say good night." It's something we've lost, and it's a tragedy. So one of the songs from that early childhood is Down by the Sally Gardens, even though I wouldn't have known who W.B. Yeats was at all until much, much later. Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. His poems are so full of poignancy and music, laments for lost youth, songs like the Song of Wandering Angus. You know, I went out to the hazelwood because the fire was in my head. I plucked and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped a berry in the stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the ground, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran, and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she is gone, and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done. The silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Extraordinary, beautiful. Glenstill Abbey, for some reason, always drew me out of myself. I was always drawn here as a young girl, but I used to come here an awful lot as a child. I used to steal away from home, and when I would think of where will I cycle to, it was always Glenstill Abbey. Then there was a local parish opening a new church that they had built, and so I was asked to sing as a local singer, and the monks were asked to provide a little bit of class with the chant, Gregorian chant. And they did their chant, and I did some popular hymns, like Holy God, we praise thy name, that kind of thing. And then at the communion, we did combine, all right, to sing one of the monks, Brother Riain, who is the wood turner here. At his suggestion, we sang a little hymn in Irish. Falter o the Riain an angle, fresh the locker on re. Falter o the Riain an angle, o'er the Christgach Riain.
Her first singing was of this Irish traditional singing with us. Shan Nos, the old manner, the old way. The meeting between Noirin and the monks came about in the late 70s. Micheál O'Sullivan, her husband, and Noirin were interested in recording a lot of the material that Noirin had learned from different traditional singers around the country. Noirin's singing of the Irish was welcomed by many of us, and primarily by the abbot of the time, Abbot Augustine. It was interesting too, that was a woman coming in the middle of all these men, and that was something very new. So Noirin, as a traditional, though classically trained, Irish singer, a woman, singing with the monks, it was quite revolutionary and very innovative, and as we increasingly felt, very enriching.
We were just married, and then we found that there was a common ground through song, through sound, through listening to one another. So then in 1980, I completed my master's in music, which was on religious song in Irish. So coming back to the monks, so enthusiastically saying, listen lads, there's these wonderful songs from the Irish tradition, like Hallelujah, 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 story gone of loves. And then they would respond and say, oh listen, fabulous stuff. I mean, how are we going to learn that? Because we don't have Irish and so on. And so I said, listen, I can teach you. It's the sound of the soul. It's the sound of our incarnation, a previous incarnation of our souls, like the Eastern tradition would talk about. That's why you love the sound, because you've heard it before. So that was a wonderful time of exchange and bartering and so on, and was hugely growthful for us all. And then of course that extended to all the members of the community too, were an awful lot of them who opted to sing on the recordings, and so with 17 would heave into the church. It was a very exciting time, very happy time. Mark Patrick Hedeman, the author and mystic philosopher, was also one of the first monks that we met here and had very deep exchanges with on music, on spirituality. The deepest friendship that I've certainly had in my life, I think.
This place that we are in now is the Icon Chapel. This icon is of Mary of Egypt, and the icon depicts Mary herself because she was one of the most famous of the ancient monks of the desert. Monk means monos, means one, and it doesn't matter particularly whether you're male or female. And she's standing on one side of the icon, and on the other side you have Zosimus, who's a bishop. And the idea is that the icon represents the full flourishing of the church. You've got the head of Christ on the top. And then you have this vast space between the two people, which is a desert. And that space is the one in which the silence and the sound occur, which allow us to move forward in whatever way the human species is meant to move forward, and in whatever way that is, it has to include male and female. There is no possibility of the species moving forward as one or the other, but as both. So for us, since 1976, the presence of Noirin has been both symbolic and symptomatic. She has, in a very important and sometimes strident way, represented the feminine principle. We've done 3 recordings with her in which her particular voice with our voices has produced a sound which is almost, one might think of it as Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. But the dialogue is important. It's like frog's chorus at certain times in the dawn, that it does provide a background and sometimes a counterpoint.
Now we're in one corner of the house, and you can see here that it is dominated by a very, very large book of chant. And this particular one came from a female community, and I got this as a gift because I used to go down helping them out with their singing. It's really, really heavy. It's about 200 pages. The page I have opened at the moment is for the Feast of Pentecost. Spiritus Domini replevitur dem terrarum, alleluia. What I really love about this particular one is that the chant has been interfered with, the notation has been interfered with by chantresses over the years. There have been notes typexed out, or indeed little pieces of manuscript pasted over bits that the chantress mightn't have liked. So this book is actually alive. You feel the spirit and the energy, the souls of the people and the voices of the communities that have been singing it. So they were all these little nuns, some of the chantresses, changing little bits and pieces of what was a written down notation for them, because maybe they wanted it to sound differently to what was actually written in the book. Now I've done the same thing in a way, in that when I started learning the Seanos tradition, it was from an elderly man called Pilaboera, and so he would almost whisper into my ear these songs every Saturday morning, but no tape recorder. It had to be actually person to person. And so the night he died, I woke in the middle of the night and I said, I'm going to write these down. I'm going to build a little literary monument to this man, which I did and published some years ago now, along with a recording. And so what I did was I decided I would push what I knew about the 5 lines and 4 spaces, the stave of music, to convey as faithfully as possible the tradition that he had passed on to me. All sorts of hemi, semi, demi, semi-quavers to notate something like this. It's and so you could see, but I've tried to push Western classical transcription to be faithful to what Philip taught me. Only I'm aware, when I'm singing at Vespers, that I'm actually ornamenting in my own little quiet way what the monks are singing. So if they're singing something like Benedicam Dominum in omni tempore, and I'm singing along with them, what I'm actually doing is Benedicam Dominum in omni tempore. You see, but it doesn't matter because I'm sitting down there, but I have to do that to make it meaningful for me and to also say, God, this is my voice. Year, I've spent halcyon days in a little cottage in the shadow of the monastery. It's a space that I lived in 21 years ago for a short period with my then husband, Riain, and 1 child at that time, 1 son. Having been wife, having been mother, this has a tremendous freedom about it. A solitary, very solitary life, but yet at the same time interacting 4 or 5 times a day with a male monastic community. every day, all through the day with me. My prayer is, O Heavenly Creator, healing, redeeming Son, guiding and enlightening Holy Spirit, stay with me now and always. And that prayer started about 6 years ago, and with it was a wild notion that I wanted to write about the sound of God. Okay, I've been singing about it always, but I actually wanted to try and put words in it. So I remember hearing about this man, a theologian who had taken over a new department in the University of Limerick here some 4 years ago, a man called Dr. Riain Conway. And so I've just completed that doctorate in theology with the University of Limerick, and the first doctorate to, please God, come out of that department. And so what I wanted to say, I found I couldn't contain in one word. I came up with a word which was a combination, what we call portmanteau, like brunch, from breakfast and lunch. And so this was from theos, the Greek for God, and sonans, the Latin for sounding. And I really wanted it to be sounding, because every time you listen to something, it's in the present. So theophany was the word there, which covers all that vast spectrum that you're talking about when you're talking about the ear and its function vis-a-vis God. Then I found that they naturally fell into 3 areas. That you hear the sound of nature all around you, the sound of the wind through the trees, vibrating the vocal cords of the earth. So these were non-human sounds in a way if you talk about speech. So it's pre-speech we're talking about here. Then I found that you have the sounds that are intelligible to you. And then you had these, what I call the silent theophany, the type of hearing and listening that's transformative, that's above and beyond what we can actually hear, that is the very essence, the timbre, the grain of the voice.
The dissertation that Noirin has been working on really challenges us to look at God in a new way. And at the heart of that is valuing, in a very intense way, the sense of hearing. We only become aware when we see something like the work Noirin is doing of how much our theology and our imagining of God has been determined by the visual, by images, by what we see. As Noirin points out in her work, hearing is our first and last sense. It's the first sense that the baby in the womb develops. It's the last sense to go when we die. And in and through the auditory, in and through the hearing, which itself is a very receptive sense, and it's one that's always switched on in us even when we're asleep, we come to really begin to listen to the Word of God. We debated a little bit about this word at the start, whether we should talk about theos and phone, which would be the 2 Greek words. I suppose in a sense it's a word itself that sounds something, theophany, it resonates. It's a very valuable contribution to theology's vocabulary, because it is talking about the way in which God resounds in human experience. And really her whole dissertation is a drawing of our attention to obedience, which is really about submissive attentiveness to something. That's what obedience means. Ob audire. Audire is to hear, to hear into, with a sort of an openness into a particular situation or context, to be open with attentiveness to the sound of God in our daily experience.
Our Irish tradition of spirituality is extraordinary. You know, in the morning you said, Airim susladia, ganairi dilium, love de mahimpo, exceedingly sig airihom. I arise with God. Ganairi dilium, and may God arise with me. Love de, the hand of God all around me, as I sit down, as I rise, as I sleep. And so that was it. You know, the whole day was enveloped in the sound of God, or in the presence of God. Every sound was the voice of God. Every sound was the grace of God. All sound came from God and goes back to the divine again. being Irish and being Christian are almost synonymous. There's some connection with the soil, with space, with each other. And of course, the genius at that particular articulation is John O'Donoghue.
Life on our planet came out of the ocean originally, and that was the rhythm, the ebb and the flow. And then each of us came out of the waters of the womb and the ebb and the flow. And the rhythm of the breath is the rhythm of speech, and then the rhythm of the thought, and it's the rhythm of poetry as well. And I think there's some lovely intuitive way in which the Celtic imagination got this absolutely tuned up perfectly. Because in contrast to historical religion, the Celts looked at the sun and the moon and the stars and the rhythm of the seasons. And in a way, what they did was to gain entry to what I'd call the lyrical geometry of the divine. Ultimately, we are held within the great sound, the great Om of the Trinity. One of the great musics in the world is the music of one's own blood. It's quite amazing that that red music is playing all the time in the kind of orchestra of the heart. In us is the reverberation of the divine breathing.
I'm holding in my hand, my left hand, and it's up against my diaphragm, a little wooden box, which is very common in India, called a shruti box. Shruti in Hindi actually is the Sanskrit word for a sacred sound, and this is a sacred sound. So it's a little wooden box that's got a whole series of drones. This particular box is called the G box because it's in the key of G and C. I'm going to give you a C drone now. This is a C drone, C and G. So basically you pump it in and out with your right hand, you hold it against your hip and against your diaphragm. And I think that's part of the magic of this box, is that when you use it for an extended amount of time, it becomes your body. So it's vibrating through your whole body because it actually grounds the sound. So it keeps going there. No matter what you want to do, this keeps going as a constant. It's like a cantus firmus, almost the sound of earth, as you were trying to make the sound of heaven, or try to send a sound to heaven.
The first recording that we did with Noirin and Riain was called The Lament of the Virgin, Queen in the Maidina, and this recording for me has in it Noirin and Riain singing a lament. It's just called On Queen, and it's a lament for a dead child, and there's no background, there's no drone, there is no other sound except her voice in it. And that particular recording is, as far as I'm concerned, the purest expose of sound and song as existence, as being that has arrived right through the entire body and come out of somebody's mouth as pure expression. It sometimes almost sounds like an animal sound or a bird sound. It doesn't sound particularly beautiful. It's just pure. It's like water, elemental. Eventually, sound and song mean vertical breathing. They mean resurrection. It's earth resurrected, standing upright. you're using your breathing to actually collect every part of yourself and then express it in a way that is eternal.
The Sound of God, that portrait of the Irish singer Riain and her partnership with the monastic community of Glenstal Abbey, was produced by Norman Winter.